Welcome to all of you. My name is Eduard van der Haas. I'm a Market Intelligence Program Manager at CBI, and I'll be your host for today's webinar on EU regulations and market developments in the natural ingredients for cosmetics sector. A few general and practical remarks to start with. Please note that we cannot hear or see you. You still, though, have the possibility to interact with us throughout the questions tab, and we will consult these questions and answer a selection of them at the end of the session. You will also be able to look back and share this webinar, as it will be published shortly on our website. Please also complete our short survey at the end of the webinar in order for us to gather your feedback on this session. And lastly, if you have any audio or technical problems during this session, we advise you to switch to the phone call modus to solve the problem. Main topic of today will be the navigating EU regulations and market developments in the natural ingredients for cosmetic sector. And I would like to give a warm welcome to our presenter and expert of today, Andrew Jones. I will first of all give you a few background information about his profile and his large experience in the sector. I think, Andrew, I hear something in the background.
Somebody has to turn off.
Yati, can you turn that background sound off, please? Sorry for that. Yeah, it seems that we have Andrew back on our screen. Very good. So let me first of all tell you a few things about his profile and his large experience in the sector. He's actually a former buyer of the Body Shop International, the British cosmetics, skincare and perfume retail giant. And he has almost 30 years of experience in the cosmetics industry. He developed supply chains for the Community Fair Trade program when he was working for the Body Shop. And today he's the director of Fair Venture, a consultancy company. He's has been advising companies from all over the world, from Asia to Africa, from Latin America to Europe, and he is specialized in the field of cosmetic ingredients supply chains, helping them to succeed on the European market. As a director of Fair Venture Consulting, he's been working in the cosmetics industry for 29 years, as I told you, and he has a and then move on to our main topic of today's, starting with an update on European legislation developments, a presentation of the main market developments and the impact for non-European exporters. And in the last 15 minutes of the session, we will also give you the possibility to ask, of course, your questions, and we expect to finish in 1.5 hours around 3:30 Central European time. So starting with a short presentation of our organization, CBI stands for Center for the Promotion of Imports from Developing Countries. We are actually part of the Netherlands Enterprise Agency, and our work is funded and commissioned by the Dutch Ministry of Foreign Affairs. Our main mission is actually to, with 50 years of experience in contributing to local and sustainable economic developments, we focus ourselves mainly on SMEs from more than 70 different countries to build sustainable trade relationships with European buyers. So you will see that our main mission in this slide is to support the transition towards inclusive and sustainable economies, and we therefore contribute directly to several sustainable development goals, such as decent work, economic growth. We also pay special attention to women and youth in SMEs, and we stimulate sustainable production and trade as we encourage partnerships for the goals. Thank you. Looking at our geographical reach, you can see that we focus ourselves on regions such as the Middle East and, of course, North Africa, the Sahel, West Africa, as well as on projects in specific Asian countries, mainly in Southeast Asia. Thank you. We also cover 13 specific sectors, actually 14 since recently, and those 14 specific sectors are based on dynamic and promising fields and industries, from fresh fruits and vegetables to tourism, from apparel to outsourcing, cacao, herbs and spices, and of course, most relevant for you, the natural ingredients for cosmetics. On the next slide, you will see that our projects rely on several support solutions for SMEs and on business support organizations. So we actually help companies to exhibit at leading European trade fairs, but also through export coaching programs with individual trainings, coaching and market entry activities on different levels, like marketing or export development. And you'll see on the right side of your screen examples of current and past 4-year export projects we did in the natural ingredients for cosmetics sector. For instance, in Indonesia, where actually we are having a project on a 4-year term, but also past projects in West Africa, in Peru, and in Colombia. On the next slide, you will also see that we work with a large base of partners. Our focus group are, of course, SME exporters, but we also work concretely with business support organizations. We also work with government and sector organizations, NGOs, certification organizations, and more locally with European importers and buyers. Thank you. And our main resource is still market intelligence. So the market intelligence is actually is free of charge, and you will see them on our main website. If you go to the slide just before this one, please. Yes, you will see that we directly offer a free of charge range of studies on our website. We try to give the most practical answers to your questions, like, for instance, which countries offer the most opportunities in the natural ingredients sector. But also, as you see on the right side of the screen, you will see our main page of natural ingredients for cosmetics with a selection of studies for each sector. We not only offer general overviews of the demand, but also concrete information about the trends, about the opportunities, and also about specific product-related studies, like, for instance, avocado, like baobab oil, like moringa, like mango, even shea butter or palm oil. And we also offer market segment studies on several segments, like anti-aging, like aromatherapy, but also on fragrances. So please do not hesitate to visit our free websites to find the info that suits you best, of course. So to finish the general introduction of CBI, please keep in mind that you also have access to our social media canals. You can therefore use our LinkedIn, our Facebook, or our Twitter page. And don't also hesitate to subscribe to our newsletter to stay posted on our latest projects and study updates on natural ingredients for cosmetics. I'm now very pleased to leave the floor to our experts of today, Andrew Jones, Director of Fert Venture Consulting. Hello, Andrew.
Hi, Edward. Thank you for the introduction and welcome to everybody here today. Thank you for taking the time to be part of this webinar on navigating recent updates in the European market, relating to, well, regulatory updates and also some market developments, with the overall view that we provide guidance and advice on how exporters from the target countries of CBI can be more successful in the European market. Yeah, so Edward gave you a quick overview of my CV. Yes, I've worked in various sectors. I started off life in a non-government organization, and then I moved to the private sector, the Body Shop, which was a really great experience, working with small and medium suppliers with a strong community-based focus, social and environmental focus. And then after that, I started my own business, Fert Venture Consulting, with the primary aim to assist small and medium exporters and also the organizations that work with those exporters to help those exporters be more successful, with a particular focus on the European market and a particular focus on the cosmetic ingredient sector. And I've worked with various different clients, and I've been working with CBI since 2004. So we have a long-term relationship. I have a long-term relationship with them, and it's great. And right now, as Edward mentioned, there's a program going on in Indonesia, and there I'm working with exporters of essential oils and other derivatives from essential oils. And yes, I'm giving this presentation to you from Colombia. So it's now 7:15 in the morning over here for me. I've been living here for 2 years, but I've also been working here for quite some time, since about 2007. So I know the country well, and I know many of the exporters for natural ingredients. But to move on to our topic, yes, so we've had the introduction from Edward. The first thing we're going to do actually is, after this brief intro, is to do a poll. There are 2 polls in the whole session, just to get a bit more interaction on the webinar. Then I'll go into the regulatory developments. Some of them stand out for me as being relevant and interesting and useful for exporters in developing countries. Then a couple of examples of what's happening in the market, also for your reference, then also to support you in your decisions that you need to make to get your products and your business set up to deal with European importers. Conclusions. Then I'll have a second poll. That's when the second poll takes place. And then we'll have questions and answers. And you can put questions in the chat, of course, and CBI will pick them up. And during the presentation, anything burning, I can also answer, so we don't have to wait until towards the end. So yeah, so quick review again. It's a regulatory and market environment overview, what's changing, what's coming up, and then how that might affect you or some of you who are exporters. And then, yeah, some suggestions on how you can successfully navigate through all of this and be successful in the marketplace. So the first poll, the first question for you is, what is your principal role in the value chain? So please answer that, and we'll get a quick review of who's in the audience today. Are you a supplier or a producer? Are you a buyer or a distributor? Are you a manufacturer of cosmetic products? Are you a retailer? Or are you none of the above, but you're an end consumer of cosmetics? So please fill out the poll, and we'll see the results in a moment on the screen.
Yeah, very interesting to see, Andrew, that a large part of our attendees are suppliers, actually.
Okay.
For the moment, I see that 45% of them are actually a supplier or producer.
Okay.
On the second position, we see also that there are quite a few end consumers. On the third, that's 29%, I see. And on the third position, we see a lot of manufacturers also with 17%. And I also see that 9% are buyers or distributors actually at the moment.
Okay, that's a very interesting mix. And it's also there. I can see the summary now. Great. So the majority are suppliers, producers of natural ingredients, followed by end consumers. Okay, great. And there's even a retailer here as well, which is really interesting, because obviously that's the point in the value chain that has the direct contact with the consumer. Okay, thank you, Edward, for sharing that. So going back then to the presentation. See if I can do that myself. Okay, brilliant. That worked. Okay. So first section, regulatory developments. So the overview is looks like this. There is legislation, and of course there are voluntary standards for those companies that want to go beyond what is in the legislation. I've got 3 areas for regulation. You've got the cosmetics regulation, you've got the REACH regulation, and you've got the classification, labeling, and packaging regulation. There's 3 key legislation that importers and manufacturers and retailers of cosmetics in the European Union are particularly focused on. And so what does the cosmetic regulation cover? Well, it covers safety, efficacy claims, specification, and some of the details, the certificates of analysis, the evidence that you have what you have, allergen declarations. Those are covered in the cosmetic regulation. Then REACH looks at health and environmental safety and the requirements for safety data sheet drawing on the globalized harmonized system. Then CLP covers classification of chemicals, labeling, and packaging. And then that deals with this in a very summary way, the key elements of the regulation for ingredient suppliers. And then on the other side, you've got the private standards for social and environmental responsibility that looks at the ingredient level. You've got halal, kosher, organic, fair trade, natural. So you've got Natru Cosmos, ISO 16128, for example. These are all voluntary. UEBT, the Union for Ethical Biotrade. Then you've got company level, SEDEX, Global Compact, Responsible Sourcing, Traceability. Again, these are all voluntary standards. And you've got private standards for quality, like Documented Quality Standards, HACCP, Codex, ISO 9001, FC, GACP, and IFRA certificates. All these are on the private side. You see, it's quite extensive. And then what's happening now is the European Union has got the European Green Deal and the Chemical Strategy for Sustainability, which is having an impact because it's bringing in regulation into some of these areas that were previously voluntary. So you see that you've got legislation now for social and environmental responsibility, which will link in with responsible sourcing and traceability. All of those elements are now becoming a requirement. It's not just important for a company to know where things come from, but it's now also becoming legally required. At the ingredient level, you've got the deforestation-free products regulation, which we're going to cover a little bit, and corporate sustainability due diligence and corporate sustainability reporting. That covered a lot of these areas, obviously with relation to sustainability and environmental protection and reducing and eliminating human rights problems. So what we're seeing now is with the Green Deal and the Chemical Strategy for Sustainability, updates will be taking place shortly in the cosmetic regulation. Updates are taking place within REACH, and that will deal with health and environmental safety. And there are updates to the classification, labeling and packaging regulation that will affect the classification of chemicals, and topics such as hazard-based assessments, hazard classes, and essentiality, which we're going to cover, are linked into these updates driven by the European Green Deal, which overall is where the European Union wants to become a net-free producer of CO2, and they're driving that across the union, and it's an important piece of work, and it's affecting lots of different areas of legislation, including that related to cosmetics. So then if we have a look at then the EU regulation on deforestation-free products, the context for this is that it's the expansion of agricultural land to produce commodities, and they've highlighted soya, beef, palm oil, wood, cocoa, rubber, and coffee. So now, so then the EU is going to ensure that it's not going to be contributing to deforestation and degradation around the world by putting in this legislation. And it's taking responsibility to end it. Now, not many SMEs are from non-European countries are going to be affected by this legislation. But you see, for cosmetic industry, they will be particularly focused on, well, what's the impact on soya, palm oil, cocoa, and even coffee that's used in cosmetics. So there is going to be a ripple effect, I believe, that, you know, companies, although it applies to companies of a certain size, nobody really wants to be associated with deforestation, and so there'll be probably voluntary actions taken by some companies to ensure that their products are deforestation free, and that could have an impact on you. And they may be asking for evidence, and maybe they'll be asking for certification. I've already heard an example already of that a product that's not in this regulation, people are asking for certification that it's deforestation free. So there could be ripple effects, and hence the reason for mentioning it here today. Yeah, major labels don't want to be accused of selling products that cause deforestation. So very quickly, these are the products that are linked to the natural ingredients for cosmetics. You've got cocoa, and in particular, for example, cocoa butter. I put chocolate because that's an example later on. I want to show you how that works with the regulation. You've got coffee, and then and what's important to note is that these, for the regulation to understand how it works, is that these are the products that are selected from for the legislation that are derived from that commodity. There could be other derivatives from cocoa, but they're not included in the legislation, only those 6 in the case of cocoa. And then coffee is also, there are coffee extracts used in cosmetics, and there's obviously soya used in cosmetics, soya oil in some products, and it's irrespective of volume. So if it's soya or it's coffee or cocoa, it doesn't matter how much is being imported into the European market, it will be within scope of this legislation. Palm oil, of course, is a major commodity for the cosmetic sector. Not really for those companies like yourselves who are working in the natural ingredients for cosmetics, because it's it's at a small scale. It's more like the niche ingredients, the actives, and from another extracts. This is more related to the major industries producing the surfactants and the emulsifiers from palm oil. And here you have like palm oil, you have its fractions as well, stearic acid, oleic acid, which are derived from palm oil. And you've also got in here babassu. Now babassu is supplied at small scale by natural ingredient producers. So that's also in this legislation, and it's written in, and therefore is most likely going to be, it's in scope of this legislation. But how it works is, because there had been a lot of confusion about whether or not, is my product included in this? If I do an essential oil made from patchouli, is it included in the deforestation-free product regulation? Well, it's not, because first of all, there isn't a commodity that relates to patchouli in the legislation, and there isn't a product specifically mentioned in the legislation. And so only when those two are present is it subject to the regulation. The rest of them, if it's not listed, it's not subject to, and if it's not made from a commodity, it's not subject to the regulation either. For example, how does this work? Well, soap can be made from palm oil, but soap is not in the annex, and therefore soap is not in scope, but palm oil is. So when's this all happening? Well, the regulation was published last year and it entered into force also last year, but in terms of application, it starts in December of this year for all companies except the micro and small enterprises, and then in June of next year for micro and small enterprises in the European Union. What are the obligations? Well, the obligations are placed on operators. And what's an operator? An operator is a natural person, legal person, who puts those products on the market, including via import or including exporting from the European Union. And companies could be involved in different steps. They could be involved in transformation transforming from a product that's on the, like the example I give you is cocoa butter being transformed into chocolate. They're both in the annex, and therefore both those people in the supply chain need to be have obligations under the regulation. And what does this basically entail? It entails due diligence to ensure that the products are free of deforestation. In other words, that they come from land that wasn't deforested after December the 31st, 2020. And they must also comply with the laws present in the country of origin as well. So what does due diligence mean in detail? Well, the data requirements are, there's going to be 3 steps involved. The first step is the quantity, the supplier, the country of production, the evidence of legal harvesting. You've got to provide the geographical coordinates of the plots of land. That links back obviously to traceability. The second step is to carry out a risk assessment to establish whether there is a risk that the products are non-compliant to the deforestation-free regulation. And then the third step is to take adequate steps to mitigate the risks in case they find there's more than a small chance that there's deforestation. They have to carry out steps until the risks become negligible. And that's how it's worded in the regulation. So here's the example of the transformation. So let's say cocoa butter is exported from a country. It goes to the company A importer, who sells it to a company B processor, and that processor makes chocolate. Well, these two people here are both operators, are under the regulation, and so have their obligations to ensure that this product is deforestation free. Also, a large company that's not an operator and commercializes the product that's included, it also falls under the scope and must complete a due diligence statement with respect to the source of that particular product. So it's pretty all-encompassing, and it's with the obligations across the supply chain, and it will have an impact on obviously on suppliers. There are no legal obligations on non-European companies, but non-European companies, such as most of you who are here, are advised to facilitate the procedures for this. And if you want to be sort of providing what your buyer needs, then yeah, you have to facilitate what they're looking for. So the traceability information, the sourcing is what you would have to supply to your customer. And just to emphasize, I put this in because if there's some confusion. If it's not in the annex, it's not in the regulation. And there you have an example here that, you get things that are made from the raw materials. In the case of wood, let's say, this code 9401, it only requires wooden seats to be regulated. I know it's not cosmetics, but it's the example they give, which I think is quite useful. But other things, if it's not in there, so if it's an essential oil made from a wood and it's not in the annex, then it's not a scope, and that's important to know. Although, like I said, most likely your customers would want to know that it's deforestation free anyway. So the message here is to really prepare yourself for these kinds of questions now from your customers. Even though the list of commodities and products doesn't really affect many exporters, there are some like Babasu oil, soy oil, and cocoa butter, and the importer will carry out due diligence steps, and there'll be an implication for you to support them in providing the data that they require. The next topic I wanted to mention is corporate sustainability due diligence. It's been going on for quite some time, and now what's the aim of this? It's to ensure that there's responsible and sustainable corporate behavior in European companies, but of course that they're managing it across their global value chain. So that means it will involve you as a supplier to ensure that you're providing the data that they need, that the supply is sustainable, and that it's responsible. Again, it's a wide-ranging piece of legislation, but it means that companies in scope, and not all European companies are going to be in scope, identify and address human rights and environmental impacts of their actions, both inside and outside of the European Union. It entered into force this year in July, and then the core elements of it are, well, companies have to identify and address potential and actual adverse human rights and environmental impact in the company's own operations, their subsidiaries, and their business partners. And so why has this been introduced? Well, the European Union did some investigation and discovered that although there are many voluntary frameworks, and they've been helping to familiarize companies with corporate sustainability, the research, according to them, shows that it's not yet sufficiently integrated into their operations and therefore it's not having the impact that the European Union want to see. So, and it's like I said, the core elements of this are to address potential and actual adverse human rights and environmental impacts. And there are some benefits to this, and this is what the European Union has stated as the benefits, that in developing countries, there's going to be better protection of human rights and the environment. There is going to be investment, sustainable investment, capacity building and support in the value chain for companies, improved sustainability practices, improved use of international standards, because you may need to actually use more standards to demonstrate that you are actually compliant with the requirements of this legislation. And this will result in a long-term benefit of improved living conditions in those countries. And then also there's benefits for the EU, again, human rights and labor rights, healthier environment, and then more transparency. And one thing we're going to come on to is, there is much more consumer scrutiny these days, and this relates into that there's going to be more information available to consumers and therefore they can make choices in what they want to buy. And also the benefits for large companies. There's a harmonized legal framework now, which gives them legal certainty, which was missing in the past. And more trust from the companies because there's more openness, there's more transparency, and a better awareness of impacts on human rights and environmental impacts. I mean, in my work with the companies that I do, obviously people don't like to think that there's human rights problems in their supply chain, and so, or environmental problems. They say, no, we're doing fine, but what's required is a more detailed assessment of that, investigation of that, to ensure that the information is valid. And so verification is required. Simple statements now about we're doing some great things with our company are no longer acceptable. Companies need to provide more details and verify what they're saying, substantiate what they're saying. So these are other benefits of this legislation for companies. So in terms of the timeline now, so this law has been coming out as a directive, and so it needs to be converted into regulations, into national law. So the 27 countries of the EU, they have until next year, 2026, to do that. And then who does it apply to? Well, it applies to companies who have more than 1,000 employees and a turnover of more than 450 million euros in any sector. And then non-EU companies that are operating in the European Union with that size of turnover. And then in 2027, the rules start to apply. So there is some time. So you're going to find that companies are now developing the systems in their companies so that they're ready to go on in July of 2027. And then it starts up with the big companies, first of all, who've got like more than 5,000 employees. And then it gets to 2029 and all companies are going to be included above that threshold of 450 million. So we were talking about the terminology is prioritizing, preventing, mitigating, bringing to an end, minimizing and remediating these actual and potential adverse human rights and environmental impacts. And so it does require some detailed assessments. Most likely, just someone saying it isn't going to be enough. Most likely, reference to some standard or certification or third-party verification are going to be required. It also means that then with this legal certainty, there's access to justice and legal remedies in case of problems that are contravening the law. So what are the impacts for exporters, or the implications for exporters of natural ingredients to Europe? Well, you are likely to be impacted as a direct or even indirect business partner in the supply chain for those larger companies that are in scope. As such, you may receive requests to collect and share information on adverse, actual or potential impacts, and to address those in line with the obligations of the company. And smaller companies may also ask you. That's going back to the ripple effect. People don't want to be associated with human rights and supply chain, hence all this interest in voluntary standards in the past. Those will continue, but now gradually, you know, the biggest companies are now within the scope of law. Then the other companies will be applying voluntary standards as well. And you'll be asked for information about environmental and human rights protection. So what are some key documents that will set you up for that? Well, you've got like the code of conduct. All companies need to have a code of conduct, which will address all those areas. Companies need to be looking at sustainability reporting. Now, not necessarily the most expensive versions, but there are other versions available that you can do yourself or that have a certification attached to them. But that is going to be more increasingly required. And then, yeah, you could also go further and have certification of different elements. Of course, don't forget that we've got environmental and human rights. So you may need to look at how you cover both of those aspects. The third area, so I want to mention, it's recent, very recent information, and it does provide a bit of a challenge to the cosmetic industry. This is hazard-based assessments. So recent developments in the classification of chemicals as hazardous properties has caused, well, I think you could say it's a negative impact, and those are my words, a negative impact on the cosmetic industry. I'm referring to the case of tea tree oil. Tea tree oil has been evaluated by a safety committee of the European Chemicals Agency, and it's been through other evaluations as well, as part of a more recent request to evaluate the safety of tea tree oil. It actually came out of a request to evaluate the safety for its use as a plant fungicide. You know, we all know that tea tree oil is it's a powerful essential oil. It's been used for many years in the cosmetic industry for well, you can't say acne because it's a medical term, but for skin blemishes, you know, it is antimicrobial, antibacterial. It's a very effective essential oil. It's a powerful chemical. It's a concentrated, powerful chemical, and it also works as a fungicide. So it went into a safety evaluation, and there's a committee that looks at the hazard, and their conclusion is that tea tree oil is a category 1B reproductive toxin. Now that is a serious level of hazard. It puts it into the area. I do apologize for the background noise. I'm sorry that these dogs outside are barking a lot, and so I'm sorry if that's distracting you. I'm hoping that I can speak over the noise so that you can hear what I'm saying, but there's nobody else around to see what's going on. But going back to tea tree, so this is a serious hazard, a reproductive toxin, yeah, and it puts it into the category of what's called CMR, which is carcinogenic, mutagenic, or reproductive toxins. And the cosmetic regulation has a particular way of dealing with those chemicals, those substances in cosmetics regulations. But in summary, the methods that we used to test this hazard included feeding the tea tree to animals. And so those who are sort of supporting tea tree are saying that this is probably not an applicable way to assess the hazard for human use. But be that as it's may, that hasn't changed the situation that this is now a reproductive toxin. And now tea tree oil will be added to the harmonized list. These are the lists of chemicals that are most hazardous and have a certain requirement in terms of how they're labeled and classified according to the European Union. So what does it mean for tea tree oil in cosmetics? Well, to go into a bit more about the classification, the ECHA, the European Chemicals Agency, has two types of classification: notification and harmonized classification. So for you as an exporter, you have to prepare your safety data sheet, for example, and in the safety data sheet there is a section on the hazards of the substance, and in some cases the obligation is on the importer to do the notification, and other times there's this list of substances that has to be the substance has to follow what is declared in that list. So notification is the obligation for manufacturers and importers, and that's where they need your safety data sheet, and they'll use that information to notify the ECHA. It's like a self-classification system, but then there's a harmonized classification for dangerous chemicals. You have to follow a certain description, and your chemical has to abide by what's in that standard. And it's for those of highest concern, the CMRs, like I mentioned, the carcinogenic, mutagenic, and reproductive toxins. And that's an annex of the regulation. Now, tea tree oil is under this procedure. So to contrast that, in a way, I will say contrast, the cosmetic industry has a risk-based assessment. Cosmetic products, and what this says from the law is that cosmetics products should be safe under normal or reasonably foreseeable conditions of use. And that's based on risk, and risk is hazard, I mean, not exactly multiplied by, but this is a simple way to express what is a risk. A risk is the hazard of something, related also to the exposure, the amount of exposure, and the concentration of that particular substance. So a hazard is something that has the potential to cause harm, whereas a risk is the real likelihood of a hazard causing harm. To give two simple examples, water and alcohol. Water and alcohol are both hazardous materials, substances. But the risk is managed because in the case of water, if you drink small quantities to hydrate yourself, that's really fine. If you decide to drink a huge quantity, then the role of water as a solvent will dilute the substances in your body that you need, and you'll become either seriously unwell or you may even die. And there are cases where that's happened. People have just drank too much water and they've died. So that's the risk has been exceeded. Equally with alcohol. Alcohol is a serious toxin, but we manage the risk by intaking small quantities. That gives you an example of hazard v risk. So alcohol and water are hazardous substances, but in cosmetics we manage the risk, looking at the exposure and the concentration of that particular substance. And it says in the law that a hazardous property of a substance does not necessarily always entail a risk. There should be a possibility to allow the use of substances classified as CMR2. There's two types of CMR, where in view of exposure and concentration, they have been found safe for use in cosmetic products by a committee, the SCCS, that exists to establish the safety of various products that are used in Europe. And that's regulated. But at the same time, a risk-benefit reasoning should not justify a risk to human health. So that is also in the legislation. So just a bit more detail on CMRs. There are two types of CMRs. There's category 2. So with category 2, then the category 2 can be looked at as safe, but category 1 has a different rating because they're more serious chemicals. And category 1 can be used in cosmetics if they have already complied with food safety requirements, if they're a food ingredient, if there are no alternatives available, if there's known exposure, and if they have been found safe by this particular committee. So the challenge is whether or not tea tree oil that is now in this category 1, whether the interested parties will take it forward to claim that under the legislation, it could be exempted for use. What's it mean for cosmetics? Well, tea tree oil is under a high threat to be banned from use in cosmetics. And what does that mean? It means that all tea tree would have to be removed from products, or products would have to be reformulated. And so right now, associations around the world that deal with tea tree are looking at what to do about this situation, because it will have obviously a major impact. Tea tree is used a lot in cosmetics. It's also used in other sectors as well, as you know, the plant fungicide sector, but it could have a serious impact on use in cosmetics. And Australia, Kenya, South Africa, and China are major supplying countries for tea tree oil. What's it mean for the industry? Well, it means that if hazard-based assessments are becoming more increasingly used to evaluate the safety of use, then this will change the way that cosmetics are evaluated for their safety, which have an impact. Already, for example, with there's a question about complex substances. Now, tea tree is a natural substance, but it's complex because it contains very many types of other compounds. It's not a single substance, which presents challenges. To give you an example of this, bergamot oil is also a natural complex substance, and it's not allowed to be used in cosmetics in its kind of natural raw state. It has to be processed so that a particular substance is taken out of the bergamot oil, because that substance is phototoxic and could cause skin problems if there's a lot of exposure to the sun when it's on your skin. So by taking out that particular ingredient, the bergamot oil is then okay to use in cosmetics. So maybe with the tea tree oil, and I don't know the answer to this, I haven't looked at all those reports in great detail, but maybe this problem is related to a particular substance in the tea tree, or maybe it's all the substances working together. But that's, I'm sure, something that the association will want to look at, because maybe they can process the tea tree oil in such a way, like bergamot, that they can make it safe for use, that the hazard has been eliminated. The fourth area, regulatory changes coming up, is, before we do that, I'm just going to look at that. I've got a few more texts coming in from CBI regarding people's questions. Let me answer that quickly. So there's a question.
Yeah, there's a product-related question, for instance. Yes. Andrew.
Yeah.
We've been receiving quite a few questions product-related, but one of them was from Catherine Hepting, and she was asking if stearic acid from shea butter actually falls under EUDR.
Yeah, let me just, I'm gonna have to quickly just flick back to that particular slide. there are a couple of, fatty acids in there. Let me just see if I can get that one. Yeah, so stearic acid, you see it's in the annex. You can see it on the screen there, down here. Stearic acid is on the annex, and therefore it would be included as part of the due diligence requirements in that supply chain. Thanks for the question, Catherine. That's really, really great. And I am just going down, looking at the questions again. I don't see any more. Right, I do apologize for the background noise. I don't know what's going on outside. But I don't see more questions right now, Edward, so I'll continue, okay, with the presentation. Let me go back to that slide.
Very good.
Let me go.
We also have a round of questions at the end, Ed, so don't worry about that.
Yeah, okay. Right, essentiality. It's a new concept that's being introduced in the European Commission to help them deal with the amount of legislation that's now being created due to the Green Deal and the related legislations, and the idea to have more sustainable, safer chemicals in the European Union. There's this notion of essentiality, which has caused a bit of a ripple of concern in the cosmetics industry, because what is considered essential? That's their question. And I wanted to mention it here. Not that it may have a direct impact on you, but it's certainly interesting to know that the significance and the importance that the European Commission is really taking in this Green Deal, and the idea to have a more environmentally zero carbon emission state, in just a matter of a few years, really. And this is it's useful to have this background information. So what is essentiality? Well, it's a tool that can be used by the European Commission when they're looking at legislation to phase out the most harmful chemicals. It's derived from the Green Deal, and helps them find, it's a model to look at harmful chemicals. And also the idea is, of course, that industry then is looking for safer and more sustainable alternatives to these hazardous chemicals. So what they say is that a use of a most harmful substance is essential for society if the following two criteria are met. That use is necessary for health or safety, or is critical for the functioning of society, and there are no acceptable alternatives. So using that model, then they will determine what is essential. What is necessary for health or safety? Well, they've got a few guidelines. So this may not necessarily be complete, but it may evolve over time. But essential, necessary for health and safety means preventing illness, monitoring illness, treating illness, and similar health conditions. This is where perhaps cosmetics might come in, because cosmetics do have an important role to play in changing people's appearance, which is one of the legal reasons that you can have a cosmetic. You can change people's appearance, and in terms of well-being, and there is a lot of information coming out about that, and there's also work going on now with a lot of dermocosmetics, people having had surgery, or people who have been affected by treatments like chemotherapy, are looking at how cosmetics can improve their skin, and it's related to well-being and confidence and self-confidence. And so maybe that's where the cosmetics industry can find a space to feel more relaxed about it. But there are other things, basic conditions, health crises, personal safety, public safety. What's critical for the functioning of society? Well, resources or services that must remain in place for society to function, critical raw materials, managing risks, crises and disasters. There's a lot of work now going out. You may have heard about this, like the foams they use to treat fires. They contain these everlasting chemicals, and so that's a question. How would that fit within this essentiality concept? Well, obviously they're dangerous and they're seriously dangerous chemicals, so let's find safe alternatives. For example, protecting the environment, performing research, protecting heritage. And then I won't go into detail, but these are all I've already talked about CMRs up here, category 1 and category 2. So CMR is the most harmful substance. So T3 is in there right now. Maybe there is a way to process T3 to make it safer. Maybe there are safer alternatives out there. We'll have to see. And what's an acceptable alternative? Well, obviously they're safer and they can have the same level of performance, but they're safer. And that's a bit of a no-brainer. So they're coming to the end of this particular section on regulatory aspects with safety and sustainability. It's basically the two key words from a regulatory perspective. There is now more focus on safety and sustainability. And this includes, and this is well related to this, is traceability and transparency. Because without traceability, you can't have sustainability unless you know where things come from, the origins, and people are transparent about communicating, then that's key for sustainability. So, and of course, this section is dealing with the regulatory parts, but it is more likely to be applied beyond the scope of the legislation. People don't want to be associated with deforestation-free products. People don't want to be associated with environmental problems, human rights abuses, clearly not. Nobody wants that to happen in their supply chain. So everybody has to now be looking at this and building systems and procedures that are verifiable into their companies to provide these kinds of guarantees. It's no longer an optional extra. I mean, there are always companies that will want to do the minimum. Yeah, I recall, when I was working at the Body Shop, the Body Shop had imposed a lot of its own voluntary standards that were not available in law. And there was one meeting that I went to with a whole bunch of suppliers supplying the Body Shop, and when somebody asked a question, well, but these requirements are not required by law, and they're taking us, we have to invest more ourselves into having these standards in place. And when we're talking way back in, when the Body Shop was first around, such an innovative company, such a creative company, way ahead of so many other companies. But that's in a way used by some companies as an argument for not going into voluntary standards. Well, that's no longer a case. If you're a big company now, you have to do this by law, but still it will be required that voluntarily companies should be looking at this, and it's becomes, it needs to be integrated into your business, or as the expression was used at the Body Shop all those many years ago, it's part of the DNA. Part of the purpose of the company needs to include this. And so when a company has that kind of concept, then maybe what might be considered the pain of having to invest in a sustainability report is like, well, no, this is just what we have to do. This is part of our process, and you have to make sure that all those costs are included in your offer to your customer, but it's just part of what you do. And thankfully, as we'll see at the end of the presentation, there are companies at the end of the chain that are dealing with consumers that recognize this and recognize the importance of safety and sustainability in front of their consumers. So it's important that you also direct your communications like that towards those kinds of companies. So the implications are, well, okay. For this,
sorry to stop you, Andrew, regarding
yes.
those very interesting sustainability criteria. We've actually also received a question from Sangeeta Lad,
Okay.
and she was asking what kind of certification or test is needed for essential oils like sandalwood oil or rose oil, from especially from Asian countries like India.
Sure.
Yeah.
Well, with sustainability, sure. Thank you, Edward, and thank you for the question. With sustainability, let's say sandalwood, historically really famous, well known for huge concerns that it was over harvested, it was an unsustainable way of harvesting, and so those are still around. So you would have to have information, evidence, third-party verified that what you're doing is you're harvesting in a sustainable way. And there would be standards out there. There probably are standards in India as part of the, for example, there's an organization called the PEFC, which is the Forestry Commission. It's an international body, the PEFC, but they relate to national bodies. So most likely there's a national body affiliated to PEFC that would be applicable in this case. And of course, there are other standards, international standards that you could use to demonstrate sustainability. There is, I mean, standards such as, I mean, if it's a wild plant, maybe your sandalwood, I don't know if it's wild or cultivated, but there's Fair Wild, there's a Union for Ethical Biotrade. These are standards that are available, and there are others as well that can be used to make sure you're doing something sustainable. But like I say, there is this Forestry Commission, the PEFC, which then, and why I'm mentioning that is because it's local organizations, there's one, for example, in Indonesia that also does that. They can provide you with the guarantees you'd need. With rose oil, well, again, it's that's probably cultivated. So if it's cultivated, there isn't really a concern about sustainability because it's cultivated product. But in terms of the quality of it, well, you have to make sure that your certificate of analysis is available, that it gives a complete. One of the just linking back to that example of natural complex substances, you know, why do buyers ask for 100% composition of your product? Because it's a natural complex substance and there are very many components in there. So in bergamot, there's bergaptins, and if these bergaptins are not removed, you can't put it into a cosmetic product. So similarly with your rose oil, you'd have to demonstrate that what you are offering is 100% pure, unadulterated rose oil with, and you would need to have a laboratory that can meet that standard to deliver that kind of certificate of analysis. I hope that addresses your question.
Thanks a lot, Andrew. Yeah, it surely does.
Sorry?
It surely does, Andrew. Thanks a lot.
Okay. So what are the implications for exporters of natural ingredients to Europe? Well, I've grouped it like this. Technical communications. You need to provide, and this also relates to the previous question, full sets of documentation. Yeah. Don't hold back on really yourself knowing what's in your ingredient. You've got to know better than the people who are buying it what's in there. You know, so you need to have 100% composition, and it's becoming more important. No longer, people have to invest in this. Okay, sometimes the technical service providers are not around. So for anyone in the audience who is a business support organization, chamber of commerce type organization, look at the environment in which these exporters are having to operate. And buyers are expecting full sets of documentation, but a company doesn't really want to have to always go to France, Germany, Spain, the UK to have their product tested. There should be facilities locally in the country making it available. They can get these documents that are required. Communications on sustainability. Yeah, you need to be communicating what you're doing in terms of essentially the two pillars of environment and human rights, and you need to do it in a way that can be verified. And code of conduct, a report on sustainability prepared by somebody else, certification, which could be natural also certification. That's a starting point to ensure that what you have is natural. I mean, sometimes it seems obvious, yeah, well, tea tree oil is natural, rose oil is natural, sandalwood is natural, but it's important from the point of view of verification. And so somebody else has to say this is natural, and then people can put it into their cosmetic product and they can calculate how natural is their cosmetic product. So that's also important to give that kind of guarantee to consumers.
Very interesting point there, Andrew, on natural products. I have a question that is also related to that from Saskia. And she would like to export or import handmade vegan aloe vera soap from Ethiopia. And she's looking for what kind of certification she needs to obtain that.
Okay, well, organic aloe vera, well, you need to have an organic certificate, first point. You may be sure that there's no pesticide or herbicide used anywhere near or on your products, but you have to prove it. So you need to get organic certification. And then when it comes to aloe vera, well, of course, it's quite a commodity type product. Yeah, it's available from many countries around the world, especially from South America. So you've got some competition there already. So you need to look at differentiating your offer, but certainly you need to have organic certification. You could also go to have natural organic certification as well. That would be another thing. It's cultivated, so you don't really need to be concerned about sustainability in terms of over harvesting, but in terms of the people you're working with, the collectors, you would need to have something that demonstrates, and initially through a code of conduct, which is then signed by the directors of the company to guarantee what you're doing, and then it would need to be verified. And there are standards around that, or you can be used to. They can check that for you. One of the most interesting ones is an easy access is the SEDEX system. SEDEX itself is a self-certification process, but you can also go for what they call a SMETA or a SMETA, S-M-E-T-A, which is where then under the SEDEX procedure, someone comes in, a third-party auditor comes in and writes you an audit report that you can then use in front of your buyers to say, well, I have a SMETA, which covers ethical aspects in the supply chain, and that can be used to demonstrate your sustainability.
And perhaps we could.
I want to say, sorry, Edward, very quick. Quality of aloe vera is critical because it goes off very quickly. You've got to preserve it somehow. There's a lot of it's a liquidy, obviously watery substance. So you need to be paying a lot of attention to its shelf life and how you preserve it, and then how you ship it as well. Thanks, Edward.
Perhaps you can make the link to another question from Mana and Engwenya, and she's asking what certification is needed to export the marula oil to European countries. Do you know more about that?
Sure. Yeah, I do know about marula oil, and I can have a little story about marula oil. I was involved at the Body Shop with the first use of marula oil in cosmetics in Europe, and so I've been working with marula for many years. So with all of these products, you don't need to have any certification as such, but clearly if you want to stand out, and with these changes coming in with relation to safety and sustainability, it's recommended that you have some kind of certification. So with marula oil, so technical documentation, you need to have all that carried out by an accredited laboratory to make sure that your marula oil is free of any kind of contamination. And I know that, you know, one of the challenges facing marula oil is contamination from pesticides that are used nearby. So you'd have to check at that level of analysis there are no pesticides in your marula oil. Then that's obviously a good quality, the low free fatty acid, low peroxide levels, all those things are like within industry norms. And then marula oil probably has a community-based supply chain. So then you need to look at the supply chain and document what happens in your supply chain. How many people are involved? What's the social impact of this business on them? And what's the environmental impact? Maybe you are avoiding the cutting down of trees by encouraging the economic use of marula oil. You know, look for those examples that would fit within the environmental benefits claim. And also people should be incorporating things like recycling or upcycling as well to really make use more efficient use of what they have, which reduces your cost, and it also is more effective in terms of providing you with other products. So with marula oil, yeah, you could look at natural certification as well. There's Natru, there's Cosmos, different types of certifications to prove it's natural. Then you've got SEDEX as well in your supply chain. And those are like the entry-level type standards. You can then later on look at, well, also make sure you have a code of conduct like it says here, and then later on look at how you would think about having someone coming in to audit your operation.
Thanks a lot, Andrew. I'll leave you go on to the market developments, even though
sure.
There are a lot of questions coming in.
But yeah, please keep the questions coming in. It really helps to enrich the presentation.
Very good.
So market developments, look at not just a couple of things really, not many things. Consumer scrutiny, I've already mentioned it. There is increasing scrutiny from the consumer. Consumers are reading labels more closely, researching safety about ingredients. They're researching efficacy of ingredients. They're researching ingredient origins. They're researching sustainability. So these are, in other words, consumers are increasingly well informed, which is also, you know, encouraged by, you know, all the social media, access to news and opinions. Very quickly, people can find out what's happening or what's new, what's trending, all these things. It's a very fast-moving world now, and you know, consumers are concerned about the environment, and they're concerned about human rights, and it's an increasing number, and that's why people are now looking at, consumers are looking at all these aspects. Therefore, the connection obviously is to make sure that when it comes to sustainability, origins, efficacy, safety, that you are providing information for the consumer from which they can make a choice about what to do. So they're looking for natural, effective, safe ingredients. They're still looking for that. Natural is still important, yeah. Natural effect, but now what's changing is now people are becoming more, they're scrutinizing more, more discerning in terms they want effective, they want a safety, and they want no harm to the planet and no harm to people. And that's becoming more and more important, and it's emphasized and it's augmented by legislation that now is also looking at these two aspects in particular at the end. I mean, legislation has always handled safety and efficacy. It's always been there in the legislation. There's no concern that European cosmetics are very safe. There's no question about that. There is so much effort put into at a legal level, which then is put the burden on companies to make sure that cosmetics are safe. But now, that's not enough. There's not enough to meet the objectives of the Green Deal. And so now, legislation-wise, we need to have information about not harming the planet and not harming people. So the demand for natural hasn't changed. What has changed is how natural is presented. Natural is not enough anymore. So marula oil, was a really exciting project when I was working on it with the Body Shop. It's a natural ingredient, but even then with Body Shop, it had a social element attached to it, an environmental element attached to it. But it also now needs a cosmetic benefit to be in the formulation. That's the other thing. So when we're talking about efficacy, there's increasing information that out there that consumers are looking, what's the purpose of having this oil in my cosmetics? So that's, people have to now also demonstrate what is the efficacy of my ingredient. So it provides you with an opportunity and a threat. Suppliers need to provide information with evidence on natural, effective, safe, and no negative impact on the environment and no negative human rights. And the starting point for that is traceability for the latter two. And like I said, it may not seem like news, but it's coming into sharper focus now. So again, with marula oil or other oils, you could sell them with a certificate of analysis, a specification, a safety data sheet. But now, there are lots of other competing products, not just other vegetable oils out there. So what is the real benefit of using marula oil in a product? It's composed of different fatty acids, and like we saw earlier on, fatty acids are used by themselves in cosmetics without using the whole oil. It's a way of moving away from the natural complex substance, the NCS, into looking at the substance that does most of what is required and not the other things that are associated with it. So there's a tendency for companies to extract things like the active component, but I would urge against that, because that's then somebody else then has to process the material to take out the component, and that is not then the whole story about the ingredient. And also from a practical point of view, if I want to use a small quantity of the component, I don't need to buy so much raw material. And obviously how people make money in this business is by selling volume. So you don't want to be selling something or reducing the opportunity to use less of it. But at the same time, you're using the whole oil. There's something lovely about that, the richness of the whole oil going into the product. So again, I'm talking about communications here as well, to really sell up what is natural.
So sorry to interrupt you, Andrew, but time is flying. Perhaps we could go to your concrete examples and then also look at your conclusions before going for a last round of questions.
Yeah, sure. We've got 3 minutes. Yeah, indeed. Okay, you wrap it up.
3:27. Yeah, time flies.
Yeah,
when the quality is good.
It does. So, yeah, very quickly then, the implications are reducing carbon footprint, information and data for your customers, use of social media, technical communications, sustainability communications. These are all areas that companies need to pay more attention to, especially the final bit, but also data on efficacy as well. Either find out what's available already in the already public information, or generate your own data to give you more data on why someone should use your particular ingredient. I was going to touch on biotechnology very quickly. It's becoming increasingly interesting, and it's being given a stamp of like more environmentally friendly. But I think in a way it acts as a possible long-term threat. If I can make a fragrance from biotechnology in the laboratory in France, then I'm not getting it from a forest in Indonesia, and I'm not involving so many people. There are some downsides, I think, to biotechnology, which I think is worth selling up natural, the benefits of using natural. So yeah, but make sure you can also stand up by having data on the environment and social benefits. So yeah, I put in these couple of examples to show that these are two companies at the front of the supply chain that really focus on sustainability. The first one is a small company called Soda, it's a Swiss company. I actually went to see them last year. This is how they communicate to their customers through Swiss. So okay, they focus on being Swiss, which actually looks at having control over supply chains, processes, and emissions and ingredients. So that's one area. True Natural, we act with transparency. We create products that have the human body and the planet in mind. So these companies are, this is exactly aligned to what we're talking about. We don't need synthetic additives to our products. We use the purest ingredients like honey and cold pressed oils and proteins. Then we look at circular performance. So they're looking at circularity, refilling bottles, and then it's about the performance of the product. So, our skincare is not only important for our skin, it's also about using effective and safe ingredients. I mean, these are all the things we've talked about in this presentation so far. So this is an example that, this is a company at the front of the chain that needs natural, safe, sustainable ingredients. And the second example is very famous, world famous company called, so that's my question to you is, as a supplier of natural ingredients, could you be a match for their requirements, or could you demonstrate alignment with their philosophy? That's what you need to do, so you can sell that to your customer who supplies them. And then the next company is, like I said, really well known, Weleda, 100 years in business. So that's a long time when there's so much change going on. And they talk about their ingredients. They talk about having B Corp, which is increasingly popular for cosmetic companies. And they talk about ethical and sustainably sourced raw materials. So these companies are looking for the ingredients that you have, provided it meets those requirements. They talk about transparency and full disclosure. Yeah, they have natural certification for their products, and they're all natural. They're all certified. They don't use GMOs. They're free from microplastics. No petroleum-derived ingredients. respect for people, plants, and animals, renewable energies. So again, as a supplier of natural ingredients, could you be a match for this company's requirements? Could you demonstrate alignment with their philosophy? This is at the front of the chain. They're looking for these ingredients, and there are many other companies like this. So this, is where this provides at the end of the day, the reason for getting more involved in providing the kind of information that these companies need. So to conclude, natural ingredients are still an important component of cosmetics. Many companies use and promote and highlight natural ingredients in their products. There are regulatory changes and changes also to customer expectations. Compliance with these changes is possible, but it requires purpose. You need a purpose, you need commitment, you need to invest. And why invest? Because you need to ensure that your natural ingredients comply with high standards of technical documentation, traceability, sustainability, that you have systems, procedures that support everything in that A, and you have marketing communications that promote everything in A and in B, with a high level of transparency to your consumers, to your customers and your consumers. So, I don't know, we could do the poll, Edward, if you want to, if that's okay with you, quickly.
Yes, we'll have to do that quickly, of course, and perhaps because it's 3:34, we'll only have a last round of questions of maybe 3 or 4 minutes.
Okay.
Yeah, let's start with the second poll that you've prepared. How ready are you to deal with the upcoming challenges? So we're very interested to know from the audience if they feel ready to deal with these upcoming challenges.
Yeah.
And actually, when I look at the first results coming in, I see that a lot of companies feel somewhat ready.
Good.
A lot of them are also neutral or unsure.
Okay.
17% feel somewhat unprepared.
Okay.
And around 10% feel very, very ready.
All right, that's good to know.
Yeah.
That's good. That's great then, that they feel very ready. That's good news. And the ones that are not ready at all, well, okay, that's great. That's only 4%. Somewhat unprepared, 16. Well, that's the 16% then that can take some of the messages from this and apply them to their company. But then, yeah, somewhat ready. I like the way this curve goes, like 12, 35, 33. So 68% in the middle. So yeah, I think that suggests there's still something more to be done to refine your offer in terms of the content, the technical content, and the marketing communications content, and the sort of sustainability content. Oh, well, thank you for sharing that. That's really great. So then let's have some questions then, Edward. And apologies to all for running over time. If you can stay for a few minutes longer, that would be much appreciated.
Exactly. It's 36 right now, so I propose to finish at 40. So we'll go for a few product-related questions, and we'll go through also a few trend-related questions. Maybe to start with product-related questions. I see a lot of questions coming in about shea butter. For instance, Simon Tebir from Uganda, and also from other countries also. For instance, Yakubu, for instance. And Simon is telling us that shea trees are growing naturally, of course, in Uganda, and he's asking if it's still necessary to test shea butter for organic certificates.
Yeah, you do need to test it, because people won't believe you. No matter how much you say, without the certificate, there's no guarantee.
And Yakubu is telling us that he is exporting shea nuts and butter.
Okay.
Are we
Okay.
somehow affected by the regulations?
You're not affected by EUDR, no. Unless somebody was extracting, no, you're not, no, sorry, I'll start again completely. You are not affected by EUDR, but I know that sustainability sourcing of shea is always in the back of people's minds. So you need to demonstrate in some way that you're taking out less than the regenerative capacity of the areas that you're collecting from. But you're not affected by that. Big companies who are dealing with shea, you're going to be affected by the sustainability regulations. I suspect you will be required to prove your due diligence in terms of environment and human rights. And we do know, we had the discussion last year on shea butter, that child labor is an issue in some parts of the supply chain for shea. So that's going to be an issue, but it will also be covered, I think, by even companies voluntarily providing information, because nobody wants to have child labor in their supply chain. And so voluntarily, you need to be ready to get that information ready for your buyers when they come.
Thanks, Andrew. Very clear. Maybe a last product-related question. This one is from Masoud Shambo. Are pigments used in cosmetics regarded as natural ingredients?
Pigments. There are some natural pigments. Yeah, there are some pigments like annatto is used. There are natural pigments used in cosmetics. What you have to do with a pigment is go to the cosmetic regulation 1223/2009, and there's an annex, and only certain substances are allowed to be called colorants or pigments in cosmetics. If it's not on that list, then it's not allowed to be used for that purpose. But natural ones are in there. If you have a natural pigment that's not in there, then your challenge would be to get it onto that annex, and that's an expensive process. That's a lot of safety data has to be generated. But if what you have is already on that list, then yeah, you can sell it as a natural ingredient for use in cosmetics as a colorant.
Thank you, Andrew. Going on to the trends, the latest trends on the European markets, we also have a few questions about the difficulties of selling natural ingredients for cosmetics in Europe recently. What could you advise to suppliers and exporters in terms of consumer evolution? So it seems that consumers want a different type of natural ingredients the last few years. What can they do about that?
Well, I mean, with the natural ingredients, if they're looking for something innovative that's not already used, the first point is to have the available data on what is the purpose of the cosmetic benefit of this ingredient, and then generate the data associated with that. And that will be, but the starting point is it safe? Safety is paramount. And so your first step, as we heard from the tea tree story, safety is paramount. So the first thing is to get 100% understanding of what is in your extract and what of those components might ring alarm bells in a safety advisor in Europe. So first of all, really understand what's in your extract. Do that first. And then if it's like, oh, this is fine, this doesn't have any safety concerns, then look at what's the efficacy, what is this, what's the benefit of this, and how much do I have to put in my bottle of cosmetic to create what benefit on my skin. And then, yeah, innovation is still important, but yeah, the challenge is to prove the safety and the efficacy in that order.
Very clear. Maybe a last group of questions regarding safety data sheets and efficacy data. Can you tell us something about that and what is most important to keep in mind for our exporters?
Most important, keep in mind that safety data sheets are, well, are a requirement most likely in your country, because the safety data sheets are derived from the globally harmonized system, which is a United Nations initiative. And therefore your country probably requires you to make a safety data sheet to transport your goods from A to B. When it gets across into the European Union, we need safety data sheets, particularly really if it's hazardous. Although the industry requires safety data sheets for all ingredients, it's fairly focused on hazards, but you need to make sure that your safety data sheet is compliant with the European Union standards, so that your importer doesn't have to do a lot of work themselves in redesigning the safety data sheet or finding data that should be in there. The one other thing about a safety data sheet is that there are new classes now for hazards. You've all heard about endocrine disruptors. Now that's a separate hazard now. If that's in your product, and it relates to cosmetics sometimes, you need to put that on the safety data sheet. The thing to do is to go to the European Chemicals Agency website. It's very clear information there about how to prepare your safety data sheet. Also go to the CLP section of the ECHA, because there you can see the notifications that importers have made. And so you get an idea of what importers are declaring in terms of the hazards, the hazard section of the safety data sheet. That's the most challenging for most companies, is that hazard section. The rest of it is more or less manageable. I think that's probably enough about safety data sheet. They're required, and they're an important, regardless of volume, they're required for by your importer.
Thank you very much, Andrew. That was indeed a very learnful presentation today. I'm quite sure that this session was not only useful for future exporters to the European market, but also for more experienced companies, actually looking for concrete updates on European natural ingredients regulations.
Yeah.
So regarding the questions that were sent through the questions box of the attendees that were not treated, so please keep in mind that Andrew will also be able to come back to you with some concrete answers in the upcoming days.
Yeah, so, that'd be my pleasure. And also, like you mentioned at the start, I mean, we have a comprehensive market information segment of the CBI website, and in there you're going to find a lot of what I've already spoken about today. I have a pleasure also to be involved in that process of writing those reports, and so you can go there and download the document and read it at your own time. And then you can also send questions back to CBI, and Edward will then field them out to the right people to answer. So if you have further questions, but your questions from today, yeah, send them in, and I will do my best to answer them in the best way that I can.
Indeed. And don't forget also that the webinar will be added to our website shortly, and a PDF version of the presentation of Andrew will be sent to all the attendees of this session by email.
Great.
So it's now 3:46, Andrew.
Yeah. So, thank you for the extra 15 minutes, everybody. I really appreciate your time. And thank you, CBI. Thanks, Edward and Yati. Yeah.
Thanks again, Andrew, and see you soon on our website for more inside information about natural ingredients for cosmetics. And of course, stay up to date about our projects and studies thanks to our newsletter. So we wish you with Andrew a very nice day, and we hope to see you soon.
Thank you to you and everyone. Thanks a lot. Thank you. Bye-bye.